Governor Pat Quinn gets more time to come up with a state budget and find a running mate. We've got that and more next on Capitol View. Hello and welcome back to Capitol View. I'm your host this week, John Patterson, the state government editor for the Arlington Heights Daily Herald. And I will admit I feel a bit like the child at the grown-up table here, so forgive me any naivete on politics, but I'm sure everyone will correct me. I've got a star-studded panel to talk about a lot of interesting stuff in Illinois. Kent Redfield joins us from the Professor Emeritus for the University of Illinois at Springfield, where you're the star number cruncher for campaign finance and so forth. So Kent, as always, great thanks to have for being here.
Good to be here.
And also from University of Illinois at Springfield, Charlie Wheeler, where he teaches the next generation of reporters how to stay on top of pension messes and budget fiascos and everything in between. Charlie, thanks as always for being here.
My pleasure.
And the longtime journalist and political observer, Mike Lawrence, is back in the Springfield area, and it's an honor to have Mike on the show and have you back around paying attention to state government. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thank you, John.
So we'll start with, I suppose, Scott Lee Cohen. And those at a specific Chicago bar got an added halftime show this past weekend when he chose that venue and time to announce that he was going to not continue with the Democratic nomination for lieutenant governor and plans to drop out of the race, which means he will not be Governor Pat Quinn's running mate. He decided to drop out after having a nice chat with House Speaker Michael Madigan about the personal issues that had come to light since Cohen had spent $2 million of his own money on his way to winning the Democratic nomination. Those personal issues would be divorce complaints in which he had been admitted to taking steroids and being abusive to his wife, ex-wife, and then an arrest for holding a knife to the neck of his, it turns out to be prostitute girlfriend in 2005. And so that was kind of the color that was added to the campaigns after the election. So Mr. Cohen announced during halftime of the Super Bowl, I'm not going to stay on the ticket, and now everyone's kind of wondering what happens next. So we'll start there. Kent, what happens next?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen this before, and so 6 years ago when Jack Ryan won the nomination of the Republican Party for U.S. Senate from Illinois, and then got into trouble because of allegations of indiscretions in his personal life, he stepped down, and the state Republican Party, the Central Committee, got together and chose a replacement. That will happen again in Illinois as soon as Cohen officially submits his letter resigning from the ticket. I believe the Democrats are hoping for a little better success than what happened 6 years ago when the Republicans came up with Alan Keyes to be the nominee. So, but we're pretty clear about the procedure. We don't know, who it's going to be at this point, and so that becomes the new parlor game. Is who's in the running to be the lieutenant governor nominee for the Democratic Party.
And I would note that as we tape this, Mr. Cohen has not officially, at last check, filed his paperwork. He has said he will, and I honestly don't know, can he file before the election results are official, which isn't until in early next month. I suppose we can start the process, and he doesn't seem to any indication that he's not going to, he's going to reconsider giving his tearful exit from the race.
Well, as I recall, in the case that Kent cited with Jack Ryan, it took him more than a month before he actually filed the papers. And I suppose Cohen would be better advised to wait until the election is officially declared. And I believe the State Board of Elections is meeting on the 5th of March to formally proclaim the results of the election, at which point everyone who won would be officially nominated, and that is the point at which Cohen would resign his nomination.
Governor Quinn has a lot at stake here. Kent talked about Jack Ryan's appointment, but Alan Keyes certainly didn't do the Republican ticket any good, but he wasn't directly linked to the top of the ticket. In this case, whoever is chosen as the lieutenant governor is joined at the hip with Governor Quinn for the general election. They go up or down together.
Yeah, and in fact, if you look at it historically, this is not the first time this has happened to the Democrats. As Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. Back in 1986, a couple of disciples of Lyndon LaRouche were nominated for spots on the Democratic ticket for that November election. One of them was nominated to be the lieutenant governor candidate, a guy named Mark Fairchild, who beat a guy named George Sangmeister. And Fairchild became Adlai Stevenson's running mate. Stevenson had won the gubernatorial nomination. As Mike suggested, they were joined at the hip, and Stevenson was so appalled at the notion of having Fairchild a heartbeat away from the governorship that Stevenson resigned the Democratic nomination, and the Democrats did not choose someone to run for governor in that election. So there was no Democratic candidate for governor. Adlai Stevenson formed the Illinois Solidarity Party, got creamed in November by Jim Thompson. And so you would think that this would have been a lesson for the Democrats to really pay attention to who all is running for lieutenant governor and who are these people and what's their background, and not kind of figure you can just mail it in and the right guy will win without us having to really work hard at it.
Charlie's exactly right. That fiasco in '86 had a lot to do with Stevenson losing the way he did. I mean, Governor Thompson at that time was going for a fourth term, and he was viewed as vulnerable. But when Stevenson had to go through the hijinks, really, of creating a separate party, it had a major effect. Now, this time, I think if Governor Quinn and the Democrat Central Committee do a good job of selecting a candidate for lieutenant governor, it's probably not going to damage the Democrat Party's hopes anywhere near what it did in '86. In fact, we'll see who it is, but it actually might help Quinn's chances of winning in the fall.
That's what I was going to ask. So we've got, with Mr. Cohen out of the picture, you can go to State Rep Art Turner, a Democrat from Chicago who finished second, and then you've got a slew of also-rans underneath him. Is it wise to go to Turner, or do you throw everybody out and start all over, given the way that the lieutenant governor's race went? And I suppose the flip side there is you open it up, and with Quinn doing extremely well in Cook County and in some of the suburbs, but not doing very well downstate, you get a kind of do-over to kind of balance the ticket and find somebody in theory downstate that would appeal more to Democrats who were turned off by Quinn.
I think the first rule is you don't make a bad choice. Lieutenant governors typically don't help the ticket all that much, but they can hurt it. And so you want to begin with that. Now, I don't think Representative Turner would be a bad choice, and several of the names that are out there would not be bad choices. And I think what the Democrats have to do and what Governor Quinn has to do is take a look at what he and they perceive as the possible vulnerabilities on the ticket and move to address those.
And I think in contrast, the Republicans also have a lieutenant governor nominee who's basically an outsider, another individual who used family wealth to basically buy the nomination over other people in the field who on paper would have a lot more qualifications for the job. And he's basically said, well, I'm an outsider, I don't know anything about this, but this is what makes me qualified. Once upon a time I was an intern for Peter Fitzgerald in Washington. And maybe that's what voters want. But if the Democrats were to choose someone who was obvious, had the kind of experience, the acumen that they could step right in and had some proven track record, this might give them a leg up. Although I think people don't really vote based on who the lieutenant governor candidate is, unless it's somebody that's perceived as a person who would not be fit for the office of governor.
Can hurt you more than it can help you. And the Democrats don't at this point know who the Republican nominee is going to be. Would it make a difference if we had the nominee were Brady, who's a downstater, Bloomington, Pontiac, or if the nominee and a perceived as a conservative, or the more moderate suburbanite Kurt Dillard. You know, what's the calculus there in terms of, does a downstater help or hurt you more or less depending on who you know, who the Republican nominee is. So it's an interesting chess game, and all of the uncertainty in the election just make the choice more problematic, and probably why they will first and foremost try to say this is the, you know, make the case as the most qualified person. Then if there are political advantages, so be it.
As Kent mentioned, the Republicans do not know who their standard bearer will be in the race for governor. At the moment, it's still too close to call, with a couple hundred votes, if that, separating DuPage State Senator Kirk Dillard from Bloomington area State Senator Bill Brady. The Republican lieutenant governor nominee is Jason Plummer, who, as Charlie mentioned, is a 27-year-old University of Illinois graduate who's comes from a family that runs, I think it's the HP Lumber chain of stores, and is a newcomer to politics. So I think his previous office held was student senator at the University of Illinois. He is an imposing figure, I believe 6'7" or so, but we talked to him recently, and he said about every day or so he gets a call from both Brady and Dillard just to let him know what's going on, and he's just eager to find out who he's going to be paired with. But back to this kind of stalemate, Charlie, what do you see playing out here with, it's a couple hundred votes and possibly a recount?
Well, I think what will happen is, as I indicated, the State Board of Elections will come in, they will certify the results and proclaim a winner, and then whoever the loser is. And as things stand now, chances are pretty good that Dillard will be short a few votes and Brady will be the winner. Then it's up to that individual to decide whether or not they want to go through with a recount. You begin with the discovery recount, where you choose a certain number of precincts. You can choose up to a quarter of the precincts in the state. It's not likely someone would do that. You choose a few precincts where you think there's a chance that the votes may have been tabulated incorrectly, and you go in and do a discovery. And I think the statute says you have to pay $10 a precinct to have this redo. Then you look at the results, and if the results indicate that the vote maybe statewide should have gone the other way, then you can go petition courts in each of the areas, in each of the counties, and ask for a full recount of the ballots cast in that particular county or that election jurisdiction. It's a long, drawn-out process. It could be very expensive. But on the other hand, one might argue, if you've invested the time and effort into doing this, you're only a few votes shy, and there's a possibility that there could be some errors made, that it's worth trying. Although I would add, in this day and age with the electronic voting, it's not as rife to be, or as error prone as it used to be back in the day when it was paper ballots and voting machines and punch cards and the rest of it.
Yeah, suddenly a 5,000 vote margin seems insurmountable, and it's not until you get down to a couple hundred, if not fewer, that suddenly everyone's looking at the idea of a recount.
Yeah, and remember there were 11,215 precincts for this election. So if the split is 400, that's what, I have to do this math in my head. That's like one vote every 3 or 4 precincts. That's not a lot.
I was going to ask Mike, given the way Democrats have been in power for the better part of this decade, and Republicans have been viewing this election as their chance to win back a lot, and now you've got the prospects of a recount fight for governor on the Republican side. Is that healthy for the Republican Party, do you think, in this attempt for a comeback?
Well, the only plus I could see to this early primary is that there's plenty of time between now and the general election. So assuming that the candidates don't go after each other, if there is a recount, and at least up to this point it does not appear as if they will, I'm not sure it'll have a long-term impact. I think, frankly, what voters are going to be looking for in the fall is, I should say, more specifics from the candidates about how they're going to deal with this horrendous budget situation. And I think they're going to make up their minds primarily on who they think can take this state forward and out of this quagmire. So what happens in February, March, even April is not going to be as important as to how the candidates define themselves and each other and their records in office and their ability to appeal to a majority of Illinois voters. And those, I think, will overshadow anything that happens between now and a couple of months from now, if it does go that long.
We are in uncharted waters, though, because the law on the books was put on the books after 1982, when there was very close between Thompson and Stevenson. Stevenson wanted a recount, and the state Supreme Court said the law is unconstitutional and declared Thompson the winner. I mean, it was Bush versus Gore, you know, 2 decades earlier or whatever it was. But at that point, we have a new law, which has been used in other contests, but we've never had a statewide recount. And ultimately, you could have, you know, the Supreme Court there arbitrating this. And it could be as simple as running ballots back through the machines, but we could get into undervotes, and did somebody fill in that circle or not? What did they mean? In 2000, there were more undervotes in Cook County than there were in Broward County, just down in Florida. It just wasn't that close in Illinois. So we're hoping that it will resolve quickly, either by the loser saying we're not going to do it, or a simple process. But it could get messy, and as Mike says, the saving grace is we've got lots of time.
Before we completely leave elections, since we don't know what's happened yet, the other thing that the Scott Lee Cohen debacle has kind of generated is a whole new conversation about what should we do with the Lieutenant Governor's office, if anything. Speaker Madigan quickly followed up all of this by proposing a constitutional amendment to do away with the office after this next round of elections, so that in 2014 it would not be on the ballot. There has been talk, and currently you can already, under law, change it so that they would be paired in the primary election along with the general election. And then there have been some perhaps more showy, State Rep Jack Franks, who's never one to shy away from the cameras, which, as a reporter for his area, I like. He said, you know, it's vacant now. And he called on the Democratic committee not to fill it, just leave it vacant and let Pat Quinn go out and do whatever he's doing. He's working so far without one. What should happen? I mean, what's the best alternative here for this office that is often maligned and ignored?
Well, John, I think we ought to keep the office. I don't hear many people suggesting that we dump the office of vice president. The idea of having someone in the vice presidency is to have as smooth a succession as possible if something happens to the president. That ought to happen in Illinois if something happens to the governor. Now, the way we've been selecting the lieutenant governor is not the way to assure a smooth succession, far from it. But if we change the way that we select the lieutenant governor, and if it were up to me, I'd model it on the presidential system, then we would have those two officials bonding early, and the chances for a smooth transition and a productive partnership would be greatly enhanced in my view.
You know, another possibility that I believe would be permissible under the constitutional language is to follow the national model, in that the party conventions formally ratify who the vice presidential candidate is going to be. In other words, when you voted in the Illinois primary for president, you did not also vote for somebody for vice president. You voted for the party's nominee, and then the convention chose the running mate. And the conventions follow the wishes of whoever their nominee is going to be. You could do the same thing in Illinois.
I think that's the preferable path, actually, because I think the world may look a lot different to a nominee once that person gets nominated than if that person is trying to win a primary and choosing someone that he or she thinks will help win the primary. So I like the national model. I'm not a lawyer, but I think it could be done by law, the way that our Constitution is written.
Yeah, I think it's clear you could do that with just changing the election code. This is about how parties nominate candidates for public office. It's not about the election of a constitutional officer. It's or replacing one after they've already won by election. The Constitution says you have to elect these people. It doesn't say how they have to be nominated. So there's a continuity argument that you shouldn't have a conservative Republican being replaced by a liberal attorney general. There's a capacity argument that says if they work as a team, then a $50 billion budget, having two people there that can share ceremonial duties and responsibilities, the more good people you can have to make decisions and think about things, the better. The problem is if you had to say, well, given on the basis of what we've done with the office so far, should we keep it? The answer would be no. Unfortunately, the Constitution was left it for the legislature and the governor and the lieutenant governor to kind of fill out what the office means. And right after the 1970 Constitution comes in, then the first governor is Dan Walker, the first lieutenant governor is Neil Hartigan, and Walker is sure Hartigan's going to run against him in the primary, and he goes out of his way to make sure that the lieutenant governor has nothing to do. And we just kind of, we got off to a really bad start. So if we chose them better, had a better process, then it would make a lot more sense to keep the office.
I suppose the irony in all of this is I believe Governor Quinn has also supported some sort of system where the governor gets to pick a running mate. The irony being that he would have never been the lieutenant governor, let alone the governor under that system, because I don't think he would have been Rod Blagojevich's first pick back in 2002.
John, the other irony is he was perfectly free to designate in this past primary somebody he would like to have run with him, and he didn't.
Yeah. There's a lot of hindsight in this race. We'll leave this as much fun as it is. Heading back into the reality of the Capitol, which is the crushing state budget deficit that's in the neighborhood of $13 billion for the next fiscal year. And lawmakers have just given Pat Quinn basically an extra 3 weeks to come up with his budget plan. He was supposed to give it next Wednesday. They acknowledge he's been a little occupied with the campaign, even though in theory his budget office hasn't been running it. So he was supposed to give it on next Wednesday on the 17th. Instead, they're going to move it back to March 10th. And as part of this deal, the governor says that on February 24th, he will post on a website all of the financials for the current fiscal year and all of the financials we know for the next fiscal year. So it's supposed to list all the money we're taking in this year, where it's going, all the money we think we're going to take in the next fiscal year, and then the public is supposed to weigh in and give their ideas for how we can wipe out $13 billion in debt. So Charlie, I'll turn to you. You usually like to pounce on the budget. Is this a good idea?
Putting the stuff online in a more convenient form. Most of that stuff is already online. You just have to go look for it. How much have we taken in this year? Every month, the Commission on Government Accounting and Government Forecasting and Accountability puts up on its website its annual monthly briefing that lists what the state has taken in and all the different major categories of taxes and fees, federal aid, and so on. In fact, right before the election, the report through January came out and said through the first 7 months of the fiscal year, the base revenues for the state are down $944 million outside of help from the federal government, stimulus money of about $900 million that is kind of cushion that blow. So that type of information is there. The spending you can find at the comptroller's website, but it's more difficult to navigate. So I think putting everything in a really, what would you say, state budgeting for dummies type format is probably a good idea if it gets people engaged, if it gets people to understand that the financial problems we face aren't a matter of doing a little trim here and a little nip and tuck there and maybe cutting out pay raises for legislators, that it's a lot more serious than that.
Mike, you obviously worked for Governor Edgar. Would you have welcomed the public input online for how to solve the budget?
I don't see any problem at all with transparency, John, but in the end, the responsibility needs to be on the governor and the legislature. And I would hope that more transparency would lead to a better informed electorate, particularly. on just what we face in this state, because the polls have shown consistently that the people of Illinois have really no idea the size and the scope of the problem or the scale. They have no sense of scale. So they, as Charlie said, you know, they think, well, just eliminate pay raises for legislators. Well, you can eliminate the entire legislature and not put a dent in this deficit. And unfortunately, I think most people are not going to go to the website. They're going to listen to the candidates, and they may not be particularly enlightened, because certainly among the reasons that the people don't have any idea of the scope of this problem is because candidates, for the most part, and public officials have been telling them, we can cut our way out of this, there won't even be a whole lot of pain involved, and when you put the numbers to that, they just don't come close to working. But this is what people have heard, and you know, let's face it, it's what they want to hear in a lot of ways. And so I'm not optimistic that putting this on a website is going to lead to a responsible budget.
Yeah, along those lines, let me ask you, didn't the Simon Institute do some polling that showed people wanted cuts, and then they didn't want this program, that program, and the other program cut, and the programs that they didn't want to cut were the programs where 80% of the federal or of the state money goes?
Yeah, Charlie, it was interesting because a strong majority said we need to cut our way out of this, but then strong majorities took off the table 85 to arguably 95% of the budget and said, don't cut here. Well,
don't cut education,
yeah.
Don't cut health care, don't cut prisons.
Yeah, and they even said don't cut pensions for public employees, and we thought that might be one place where they'd say, yeah, go ahead and cut, but they didn't.
And with that, we're pretty much out of time. I would just say it's nice to see that there's some consistency in Illinois, having basically blown every deadline for coming up with budgets. Now we've gone ahead and have undecided elections, so that really we kind of are in the process of doing nothing year-round. We're out of time for this week. I'd like to thank Kent and Charlie and Mike for joining me. I'm John Patterson. Please tune in next week for another Capitol View.